GDP was at about 3% in the second quarter. A massive trade deal is done with the European Union, and the president seems pleased.
Consumer spending is up. Business investment is way up. Domestic manufacturing is way up. The real disposable family income is up, and personal savings are up. Other than that, we're not doing so great.
Personal savings were up in April, but have dropped a bit actually since then and are generally lower than their peak in 2024. But on the same day, the president said that Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell announced the board is leaving rates unchanged, much to President Trump's annoyance. Powell did cite concerns over future tariffs as a factor here.
We're still, a ways away from seeing where things settle down. It doesn't feel like we're very close to the end of that process, and that's not for us to judge, but it feels like there's much more to come.
One certainty on the tariff front seems to be the deal the Trump administration's made with the European Union while the president was visiting the UK earlier this week. The president of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, was asked, what exactly the U.S. is giving up here in this deal? What are the American concessions?
So the starting point was an imbalance, a surplus on our side and a deficit on the U.S. side. And we wanted to rebalance the trade relation. And we wanted to do it in a way that trade goes on between the two of us.
Tariffs on the EU will remain at 15%, and they agreed to spend billions of dollars to purchase U.S. energy products.
It's interesting because that's what the Trump administration has been all about with these tariffs, saying that we are wildly out of balance with all of these counterparts around the globe, and that it's just about closing that gap.
Fox News Sunday anchor Shannon Bream.
Now, we were told that next to China, this EU one was the toughest of all, because all the cabinet secretaries and people I talk with who were in on these negotiations said, listen, when you're trying to do 27 at once, and some of these countries have, different feelings, and trying to do this as a unified front, that they thought that was going to be really difficult. The day before they walked into this, the president said 50-50, it gets done. So I think a lot of these are frameworks. There's a lot of complex detail to get on paper and finish out. But the White House is definitely celebrating that one.
So, Shannon, we got some data, economic data. In the second quarter, GDP is up, I think 3%. I thought a couple months ago we were headed for a recession. I mean, that was what we were told, right? That was the fear. There's always some time left, but things sure do feel different than they did a couple months ago when taco was a thing.
Exactly. And apparently August 1st, there's no more taco. There's no discussion of taco. If there's no grace period, we're moving forward. But yeah, GDP coming ahead of expectations. The Trump administration, the president, very excited about that for the country, but also for vindication that the way that they're handling things they think is the right way forward. But, there are those who say we don't really know the fallout from the tariffs yet. Now that this, August 1st tariff kick in is going to be something different to stir into the pot of the U.S. economy. And it seems to be the primary reason that the Fed chair has declined to move forward with a rate cut, saying there's still too much uncertainty out there. So while the Trump administration says, look at this net tariff gain that we're bringing in, all of this money coming into this country, look at how well inflation seems to be tampered down, under control. Look at the GDP. I mean, they're pointing to all the things they think are really beneficial, while critics will say, well, the big, beautiful bill, the fallout of that's going to be bad. The August 1st tariffs are going to be bad. So really the only thing to settle those debates is time. And so now we wait.
Yeah, Powell said after the Federal Reserve Board decided to keep interest rates where they are, he said we're still keeping an eye on the impact of tariffs to see what effect they have on inflation, that we are a ways away from seeing where things settle down. But notably, Shannon, 2 Federal Reserve Board members did not vote with the rest of the board. That's almost unheard of. The board is typically unanimous. I think since the early 90s they've been unanimous. What do you think that means?
I do think it shows that there's clearly a split in the best economic minds, what they think we need to do moving forward. And, critics will say, look, the Fed chair was very comfortable right before last fall's election doing a serious rate cut. And they ask questions about whether this is political in nature. The Fed chair is supposed to be completely insulated from those kinds of things. And he may actually be hesitating to move forward with a rate cut because he doesn't want to look like he's been politically pressured into it. It's possible, but as you said, very rare. And it's been decades since 2 governors have dissented from that decision. So it seems to be that there is going to be enormous surprise, I think, from the White House on down if there's not some kind of cut in the September meeting, the president wants 3 points, 3 full points. If he gets a quarter, it will be progress for him. So we'll see. But yeah, you're right. That dissent is rare, and to have 2, really rare.
The president, Shannon, was also in the UK this past weekend and earlier this week. And as he left, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer said he was planning to recognize a Palestinian state unless Israel alters its handling of the war. France's President Emmanuel Macron has already said that this fall at the UN General Assembly, he plans to make an announcement to recognize a Palestinian state. Canada is now on board. Our president says no, doing so would reward Hamas. Either way, it sounds like this is going to be quite a UN meeting in New York this September.
Yeah, it's always full of controversy. The UN not supportive of Israel. In fact, many members openly, it would seem, anti-Semitic and anti-Israel. And so those meetings are always very tense for Israel. It's under a ton of pressure because of the civilian impact of what's going on in Gaza. And I think that this talk of two-state solution, you're going to hear more countries stepping up and say, yep, we need to give the people in Gaza some autonomy. We need to put this thing back together. How you do that is going to be the source of enormous debate and disagreement. Now, to the aid part of this, Israel has said it's opened up more areas. There are airdrops. They're trying to coordinate. The Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is one of these groups that's now trying to work with U.S., Israel. And they say they'll work with any aid group that will work with them. They will deliver the aid for free. We've got the executive director, Johnny Moore, on with us on Sunday to answer some of the criticism about the way that they're handling the situation, if more could be done to help people there, and if they're actually making things worse and not working with the UN. So we want to separate a little fact from fiction on that. But I think all of that factors into that conversation with more of these leaders stepping up to say, okay, we think it's time for a Palestinian state. It's time to move on and figure out what the next chapter is.
Shannon, we also had this week in New York a horrific shooting, and it brought up questions for the Democratic candidate for mayor, Zoran Mamdani, who went to the home of the officer who was killed to comfort their family. He says he doesn't want to defund the police, unlike his past tweets following the death of George Floyd. But he said he does still want social workers to respond to mental health crises. How would that work, Shannon? Because not all mental health situations end up being nonviolent. Mm-hmm. Some of those end up requiring police.
Yeah, and I think what he referred to, or somebody attached to his campaign referred to domestic violence disputes. Now, my late father was a police officer as a young guy. He told me those were the absolute worst calls to show up on as a police officer in the middle of a domestic violence situation. They were very volatile. They were very dangerous. And it was something that he and his fellow officers really dreaded doing as part of their job. So when I hear that you're going to send a social worker, I worry about the safety of the social worker and whether that's going to be able to protect whoever is the victim in the situation. Doesn't, to most law enforcement officers, sound like a great solution to the problem. The reversal of what he had to say in contrast to what he has said in the past is confusing at best, other than you can say, well, he's running for office. Maybe he has moderated his views. But what we're talking about is tweets that he was confronted with during that presser that are not from when he was a middle school kid, high school kid, even college. These are 4 or 5 years ago, some of them even more recent than that. He was a fully grown adult professional man at that point. So you're going to have to understand that people are very skeptical of what you're saying now, where you're saying, well, that's not my position now. Well, it was pretty recently in your adult life. And so expect more questions.
Speaking of questions, before we go, let's get your thoughts on Jeffrey Epstein. It's still alive, this topic, and the president is still taking questions about it. Now they seem to be more tailored about Ghislaine Maxwell, Epstein's former girlfriend. She is currently in prison for her role in helping Epstein abuse young girls and traffic young girls. But she insists that her conviction should be overturned based on an agreement made in 2007 with Epstein. And the Supreme Court is going to look at this in September?
Yes. The Southern District of Florida, that federal district down there, made a deal with Jeffrey Epstein. Now, she and her legal team have argued that it also extended to any potential co-conspirators, which would be her. Now, her case was heard in New York. It was handled there. And so the argument against her has been, we never made a deal with you. That was a deal down in the Southern District of Florida, different U.S. attorneys, different group. That was Jeffrey Epstein's deal. It was never your deal. But that's right. She's argued this all the way to the Supreme Court that she should be protected by that deal and never should have been tried, should have been some, protection against that. So she's filed all of her final pleadings. Both sides have weighed in on this. So the Supreme Court is on summer break, although they still handle emergency issues. The next conference they have is in late September. So the hundreds, maybe thousands of cases that have been appealed to them, they start wading through them. And it takes 4 votes to get it onto the docket. It's very rare. The percentage is so small. But she'll be in that pile in late September. And so it's going to be a very busy, big conference. There's a good chance they don't even vote on her case that day. It could get kicked from conference to conference until they whittle down to a manageable size load of cases. She could be voted on that very first day. It's all secret, so we don't know anything. But even if they do vote to hear her case in September, it probably wouldn't be until months later they'd actually hear the arguments.
And finally, Shannon, the former Democratic presidential candidate and former Vice President Kamala Harris announced this week she's not running for governor in California, but she didn't give any tea leaves about what that means. I think she used the words "for now." She's going to be staying out of public office. Lots of speculation, right? Is she saving herself for 2028? That's the obvious question. Do we think she is?
Well, apparently she's got a book coming out. And it is going to detail those 107 days. I think that might be the name of it, 107 days of when she was thrown into this effort to run for president in earnest, just coming down to the finish line in 2024. So I think she's very much leaving the door open for 2028. She shows up at the top of polling, almost in the 1 or 2 slot for everyone looking to the 2028 field for Democrats. Now, that may be because obviously she was just the vice president. She's got enormous name recognition. But there are plenty of other people nipping at her heels in the Democratic field who are not at all going to roll over and kind of cede that, confirmation nomination to her, as they felt like happened in just a crazy tornado of events in the summer of 2024. But I think she's very much leaving that door open.
Fox News Sunday anchor Shannon Bream, thank you so much for joining us.
Jessica, thank you.